The loudest laughs are often the most afraid of silence. What happens when arrogance clashes with honor? When the surface is mocked, but the depths hide something sacred? Let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to witness what unfolds next in this unforgettable story. Chad Bentley leaned back against the rail of his yacht, a smug grin curling at the corners of his mouth as he popped the top on another imported lager. The yacht's polished deck glinted in the sunlight, a beacon of wealth and youth docked proudly at Cypress Point Marina. He wore his sunglasses even though the afternoon sun was starting to dip behind the horizon. Not because of the light, but because he liked the way they made him look untouchable. Beside him, Trey Lawson scrolled through his phone, muttering something about engagement metrics and follower counts. Brianna West, dressed in a barely-there sundress and holding her phone in selfie mode, twisted her lips into a pout and leaned against the rail for a candid shot, the marina stretching out behind her like a lifestyle ad. "Zoom in on that," Chad said with a chuckle, nodding his chin toward the far end of the dock. Trey turned his phone and snorted. There, nestled between million-dollar fiberglass shells, sat a ghost. An old, sun-faded wooden vessel that looked like it should have been condemned a decade ago. The bow was splintered. The varnish had long since surrendered to salt and time. The name, hand-painted and chipped, read, Everwatch. "That thing's practically rotting into the sea," Trey said, angling his phone to record. "Wait, dude, is that guy living on it?" Brianna squinted. "He's always here. Kinda gives me haunted sailor vibes." Chad took a swig from his bottle and leaned in toward the lens. "All right, viewers. Today's Yacht Club cringe of the day. Check this out." "This," he said, dramatically panning his phone to the Everwatch, "is the kind of shipwreck you only see in movies about cursed treasure." They burst out laughing. Brianna clapped a manicured hand over her mouth, Trey let out a theatrical gasp, and Chad turned the camera on himself. If you know the spell to raise this ancient mariner from the dead, drop it in the comments. #GhostBoat. They didn't see the man who had just stepped out from the cabin of the old boat. Harold Bates stood silently at the edge of his deck, arms crossed over his chest, one brow raised just enough to wrinkle the tan skin along his forehead. His posture was straight, unusually straight for a man his age, and his hands, though calloused and worn, gripped the railing with quiet precision. He said nothing, only watched. The laughter from the yacht faded as they noticed him. Brianna's phone lowered. Trey's grin wavered. Chad, of course, wasn't done. "You need help fixing that relic, sir," he called, voice just a little louder than necessary. "We could start a GoFundMe, or maybe send it to a museum." Harold didn't flinch. He looked at them as if weighing something invisible in the air between them. Then, without a word, he turned and stepped back inside his boat. He laughed again, less certain this time. But someone else had noticed the exchange. Just down the dock, Sam Ruiz, a marina staffer, leaned on a coiled rope and shook his head. He'd seen the old man come and go for years now, always polite, always early, always alone. Sam had helped him once when the dock cleats snapped during a storm. He'd offered Harold a ride home. "I am home," Harold had said then. Sam watched the trio of yacht kids swagger around like they owned the water and felt a tight coil in his chest. He didn't like how they looked at the man, and he really didn't like how they looked at that boat. Because Sam knew, like a few of the older dockhands knew, that Everwatch wasn't just some junk heap. He'd seen what Harold kept inside. The logbooks, the photographs, the folded flag in the glass case, and the way the old man sometimes sat on the bow at night, whispering names into the wind. Back on the yacht, Chad had already moved on to setting up his next shot. "Let's get a drone overhead, Bri. I want to get that full contrast, you know, Beauty and the Barnacle." Trey laughed. "The haunted schooner and the billionaire playboy. Love it." But the camera never launched. A low rumble shook the air, subtle at first, like thunder in a clear sky. Then louder, closer. People along the marina began to pause and look up. Chad looked at Trey. "What is that?" Trey had gone pale. That's a..." But he didn't finish. The sound was unmistakable now. A helicopter, military grade, coming in low. People scattered to the edges of the marina as the chop-chop of the blades grew deafening, sending ripples through the water and sending plastic drink cups skittering across the docks. Camera phones went up, boats rocked, the sleek sails swayed under the force of the wind, and then it descended right behind them. But that part of the story hasn't come yet. For now, Harold Bates sat inside Everwatch, pouring hot coffee into a tin mug, ignoring the spectacle outside. A small, hand-drawn calendar hung near the porthole, the current day marked in red ink with one word: visit. No one spoke when the helicopter finally touched down on the long, empty slab behind the marina. The force of the rotor wash threw sand into the air, rattled masts, and flipped at least one overpriced charcuterie tray into the sea. A Coast Guard officer in orange stepped out first, adjusting his headset and scanning the dock with professional calm. Behind him came someone unexpected, an older woman in dress blues, walking with the controlled precision of someone who had spent half a lifetime commanding people who didn't dare talk back. Admiral Susan Whitaker. The onlookers didn't know her name yet, but they knew a high rank when they saw it. The gold trim, the chest full of ribbons, the quiet gravity that settled over everything when she walked. Harold Bates stood quietly on the deck of his boat, as if he'd been waiting. He wasn't surprised by the chopper. He wasn't startled by the Admiral's arrival. He simply removed his watch cap, set it on the rail, and gave her a slow, deliberate salute. Admiral Whitaker returned the gesture with a firmness that spoke volumes. The silence broke in pockets, whispers rippling through the bystanders, then the crackle of phones being raised to record, then the murmured guesses and half-informed comments about what in God's name was going on. "Who is that guy?" Brianna whispered. Her phone was pointed but shaking slightly. "I think that's an admiral," Trey said. "No, Chad muttered, staring at the scene unfolding. His cocky grin had faded entirely. The Admiral stepped onto the dock, flanked by two aides. She didn't walk to any of the yachts. She didn't speak to the crowd. She went directly to Everwatch and stopped at the gangplank, her posture straight as a rifle barrel. "Permission to come aboard, Boatswain Bates," she called. "Granted, Admiral," Harold replied, voice clear and steady despite the years etched into it. Gasps, audible ones, not just from the yacht kids, but from the older marina-goers now creeping toward the dock, drawn like moths to the gravity of something bigger than them. One of the aides handed Harold a crisp folder. He opened it without a word. Inside, a citation printed on heavy parchment, embossed with the seal of the Department of the Navy. His name was written at the top. Below it, words that no one from the laughing crowd had expected. For acts of extraordinary heroism during Operation Desert Saber, resulting in the evacuation and survival of 227 military and civilian personnel. Admiral Whitaker turned to the gathering crowd, her voice steady but commanding. "This man is Boatswain Harold Bates. He served this country in 2 wars. During the Persian Gulf War, he personally oversaw the extraction and defense of a naval convoy ambushed during a communication blackout. His actions saved hundreds of lives. This vessel," she turned to the old boat, "was built by his own hands as a tribute to the men and women who didn't make it home." She paused, let the silence settle like a stone. Every bolt, every plank, every name carved into the woodwork below decks. Memorials, not forgotten, not invisible. For a beat no one moved. Then, slowly, the noise returned. Not as laughter, but as a swelling wave of whispers. Then scattered clapping, hesitant at first, then growing. Chad didn't clap. His jaw was too tight, his sunglasses pushed up on his head like a forgotten costume. Trey lowered his phone. "Bro, he built it? As a memorial?" Rihanna's voice was tight. "We filmed him, mocked him. I didn't know. Chad muttered. "You didn't ask," Brianna snapped, her voice sharp with something like guilt. Sam Ruiz, standing at the edge of the crowd, crossed his arms. He wasn't smiling, but something in his expression had softened. Less weariness. More vindication? Inside the Everwatch, Harold stepped back into the cabin and opened a weathered wooden chest. Inside were photographs, black and white, sepia, faded Polaroids, all tucked neatly between bundles of letters and maps. He retrieved a small velvet box from beneath them and walked it back outside. The Admiral took it with care, opened it, and revealed a small silver pin, the Navy and Marine Corps medal, untouched since it had been awarded. She held it in both hands and turned back to the crowd. There are men and women in uniform whose stories you will never know. They do not walk with entourages. They do not boast. They carry their service like a lighthouse carries its light, not for themselves, but for those still out at sea. A little girl near the front, maybe 6 or 7, tugged at her father's sleeve and whispered, "He's like a hero, right?" Her dad nodded, blinking fast. "Yeah, he is." And still Harold said nothing. He stood, cap in hand, staring out past the dock, past the water, into the horizon as if scanning for something long gone. His quiet presence spoke louder than all the speeches ever could. Admiral Whitaker stepped down from the boat and nodded to Sam Ruiz. "You've got a treasure here. Guard it better." Sam nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As the Admiral made her way back to the helicopter, Harold turned slowly to the stunned crowd. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but every word carried. "You see an old man, an old boat, and you think you know the story, but you never asked. You never looked closer." No one replied. Harold picked up his cap, dusted it off, and settled it back on his head. The chopper began to spin up again behind him, dust rising once more into the air. Trey took a step forward, tentative. "Sir, Look, I didn't know. I shouldn't have—" Harold raised a hand, not in warning, but in something gentler. "You didn't know. Now you do." The chopper lifted off behind them, its sound fading into the sky. And on the dock at Cypress Point, laughter was replaced by reverence. The marina was never quite the same after that afternoon. Not because the rich kids stopped coming. Chad Bentley's yacht still sat smugly in its berth like nothing had happened, but because people started walking slower near Slip 23. That's where the Everwatch sat, anchored not just by ropes, but now by respect. Children whispered near it, older veterans stopped and gave nods, and more than a few strangers, local and otherwise, stood quietly at the edge of the dock just to see the boat that brought a helicopter to the coast. The whispers hadn't died, but they'd changed. Harold Bates, though, had changed nothing. Every morning at 600, just as he had aboard his Navy ships for decades, he scrubbed the deck with salt water and vinegar. Same rag, same rhythm, same quiet. Only now he had company. A boy named Ethan began showing up around 7:15 most days. 11, maybe 12, skinny, curious, polite. He never asked to come aboard. He just sat on the dock with a notebook, watching Harold work. 3 days in, Harold spoke without turning around. "You drawing or spying?" Ethan blinked. Drawing, sir." "Show me." The boy scrambled up, holding out a lined page torn from a school notebook. It was a surprisingly decent sketch of the Everwatch, drawn from a side angle. The proportions were off, but the soul was there, the jagged edge of the bow, the crooked yet determined mast, the rippling flag. Harold looked it over for a moment, then nodded once. "Not bad." Ethan grinned. "Can I help you clean?" "No," Harold said. The boy's smile faltered. "You can learn, though." The grin came back, wider now. Each day after that, Ethan helped scrub the deck. Harold taught him how to tie knots, starting with the square knot and working toward the bowline. When Ethan got it wrong, Harold didn't bark. He simply made him do it again, until it was perfect. One afternoon, As Ethan coiled rope and Harold filed rust off the old stern rails, the boy asked, "Why don't you paint over the names?" Harold paused. "They're not just names," he said. "They're stories." He stood and motioned toward the interior. "Come on. You're old enough now." Inside, the Everwatch was dim and smelled of salt and varnish. Along the hull, carved into the wood in meticulous block lettering, were over 100 names, each one about the size of a playing card, etched with a burning pen, sealed with lacquer. Ethan's eyes widened. "These are real people?" "Every one of them." Harold's voice was quieter now. "Crew from the Trask, Marines from the Fowler, 2 civilian aid workers, a chaplain named Henry Brewster. He sang as we took fire." Ethan ran his fingers gently over the names. "What happened?" "Ambushed during a blackout. No GPS, no backup, just dead radios and smoke. I had to get them out on a converted landing barge. This boat, she's the same frame." Ethan turned slowly. "You rebuilt it?" Harold nodded. "Piece by piece." The boy took it in with the reverence only children possess when they know they're seeing something important, when they know a grown-up is trusting them with truth. Later that week, Sam Ruiz stopped by the dock holding a clipboard. "Harold, City Council's thinking of doing a spotlight piece. You know, something for Veterans Week. Talk of renaming this dock." "Not interested." Sam raised a brow. "You sure?" Harold kept scrubbing. "Names belong to the fallen, not to me." Sam hesitated, then chuckled and tapped the edge of the clipboard. "You're not getting out of the tribute garden. That's happening with or without your approval. Fine, put benches in. Trees, something people can sit near without stepping on memories." Sam nodded. "We'll call it the Watcher's Garden." Across the marina, Chad Bentley stood in his deck chair, arms folded, watching them with something unreadable in his eyes. He hadn't spoken to Harald since the day of the landing, not once. He'd deleted the videos from his channel within hours of the incident, but the internet has a long memory. Screen recordings, re-uploads, comments dissecting the sneer in his voice and the laugh on Brianna's face. Trey had tried to distance himself, joining a volunteer veteran initiative downtown, but Chad didn't apologize. He just watched. That Saturday, the marina hosted a community barbecue, free food, veterans honored with Red White Mill name badges, local press, a few county officials, a lot of back-patting. Harold came late. He wore a clean button-down, dark jeans and his old watch cap. He stood near the back and sipped coffee from a thermos. Ethan ran up to him, holding a half-eaten burger and grinning wide. "You're going to speak, right?" "No. What they asked you." "They can talk just fine without me." Before Ethan could argue, a voice rose from the front stage. It was Sam, microphone in hand. "Before we wrap up," he said, "we just want to say thank you to a man who didn't ask for this spotlight, who never asked for anything, and who built something sacred on this water. Harold Bates, would you at least come up here and let us clap for you?" The crowd turned. Harold didn't move. Ethan tugged his sleeve. "You should go." The veteran looked down at the boy, then at the crowd. He walked forward, slowly, with a quiet purpose that made people fall silent as he approached. He didn't take the mic. He didn't speak. He just stood there, removed his cap, and gave a single, deliberate nod to the people before him. And that was enough. The applause started soft, then louder. People stood, not clapping for fireworks, clapping for silence, for sacrifice, for stories carved into wood and carried by sea. A week after the barbecue, the sign went up near Slip 23, Venture's Garden, a bronze plaque mounted to a weathered cedar post. Beneath it, 3 granite benches circled a raised flower bed shaped like a ship's wheel, planted with red poppies, seagrass, and forget-me-nots. At the center, a pole held an American flag, and beneath it a smaller one, the Navy Jack, the rattlesnake slithering across 13 stripes, teeth bared. Harold Bates never asked for a ceremony. But one happened anyway. The crowd was smaller than the last. Fewer cameras, more sincerity. Just local veterans, a few city council members, Sam Ruiz in a tucked-in shirt for once, and Ethan with a folder full of fresh sketches he insisted Harold take home. One drawing showed the Everwatch docked at sunset, colors blazing behind her like a flame. Another showed Harold standing at attention, eyes fixed forward, a quiet storm inside him. The day passed gently, like old sails catching a steady wind. That evening, Harold stood on his deck watching the last light stretch across the water, tin mug warm in his hands. The laughter of children echoed faintly from the boardwalk. From nearby boats came the occasional clink of dinnerware, the hum of small talk. Peaceful sounds, the kind he never took for granted. Then footsteps approached. He didn't look until he heard the voice. "Sir?" "Chad Bentley." No sunglasses this time, just a plain black t-shirt, jeans, and boat shoes that looked like they'd seen real work for once. Harold turned. Chad stood with his hands at his sides, not in the slouched, cocky way Harold remembered, but stiffly, like a boy trying to hold still at a funeral. "I was wondering if I could talk to you." Harold gestured to the edge of the dock. Dock talks, boat listens. Chad swallowed and nodded, stepping to the side and lowering himself onto the weathered planks. He looked up at the boat as if seeing it for the first time. "I didn't get it," he said quietly. "I really didn't. I figured you were just—" He trailed off. "A ghost," Harold said flatly. Chad flinched. "Yeah." Silence stretched between them like rope in tension. "My grandfather was Navy," Chad continued. "He died when I was a kid. I only remember a few things about him. One of them was how seriously he took silence. Said sometimes, 'You honor people more by shutting up than by making a speech.'" Harold's eyes didn't leave him. "I'm sorry," Chad said, "not just for mocking your boat. For mocking what it stands for. I think I knew I was doing it, but I didn't understand how bad it was." Harold finally moved, stepping off the boat and standing beside him on the dock. For a moment they simply stood, side by side, both watching the water. "Your grandfather served in a combat unit?" "I think so. He had a Purple Heart. My dad keeps it in his office. Told me once he got it trying to pull a guy out of a burning carrier." Harold gave a single nod. "You ever want to know more?" he said. "I've got a library below deck. Not books, names, faces, ship logs, things nobody remembers until they make the effort." Chad hesitated. "Would you let me see it?" Harold didn't answer with words. He simply stepped onto the Everwatch and held the railing. Chad followed. Below deck, the air changed, not in temperature, but in mood. The carved names along the hull glowed faintly in the golden light of an overhead lamp. Chad stepped slowly, his fingers brushing one of the names. "William Crawley," he read aloud. "Engineer. Stuck behind during the blackout. He stayed with the power systems. Kept him hot long enough for the last evac raft to clear." Another name, Nora Whitman. Civilian contractor, aid specialist, refused to leave without the wounded. Chad moved slower now. Each name hit harder. Each story whispered from Harold's lips painted a picture that made the boat feel more like a church than a vessel. After several minutes, Chad stood near the stairs again. "I didn't know you could carry so much without making a sound." Harold looked up from one of the frames. "That's the thing about ballast," he said. "It's heavy, but it keeps the ship upright." They stepped back onto the dock together. Chad lingered for a second, then pulled something from his pocket, a small silver pin. Not military, just a lapel badge shaped like an anchor. "I want to help," he said. "I don't know how, but I want to. Maybe do some work on the boat, help with the garden, learn the stories." Harold took the pin, weighed it in his hand, then looked back up. "You start by showing up." That night, Chad didn't go back to his yacht. He stayed near the dock, helped Harold coil the lines, even scrubbed a few salt stains off the rail. The work was quiet, repetitive, meaningful. It was a beginning. Days turned to weeks. Chad became a regular presence at Slip 23. Not a helper, a student. Other young people joined in, too, drawn by curiosity and maybe a little guilt. Ethan remained the heart of the group, his sketches now pinned along the inner walls of the Everwatch like a gallery of remembrance. Harold never asked for any of it. But he didn't stop it either. When November came and the marina held its first official names in the Hall ceremony, over 200 people attended. They read names aloud, they cast wreaths into the water, children placed flags in the garden. And at the end, when asked to speak again, Harold only said one thing. If you've ever loved someone who served, this boat is for you. He tapped the rail once, firmly, then stepped down and let the silence say the rest. As twilight fell, a familiar sound echoed across the water, a low rhythmic thrum. People looked up. A single military helicopter flew overhead, slow and deliberate. This time, it did land. It simply circled once, then peeled away into the sky. But everyone understood. There was a salute. And Harold Bates, boatswain, builder, and bearer of names, stood with his cap in hand, eyes skyward, quiet and proud, as the echoes of blades slowly faded into the stars.